At 05 and 17 hours, the Caribbean Sea is still half asleep. The horizon glows faint orange, and the ocean breathes with the slow rhythm of dawn. But aboard the USS Gravely, silence is shattered. A sharp electronic tone cuts through the corridors. Condition 3, set and man all key stations. Instantly, the ship changes personality. Boots strike steel. Coffee mugs hit tables. Radios buzz to life. The destroyer, which moments ago felt like a floating city, transforms into a single living machine. Every deck, every console, every heartbeat moves toward readiness. The Gravely's forward gun mount stirs, the 5-inch Mark 45 cannon turning just slightly toward the southwest. The motion is subtle, but everyone aboard feels it, like a dog raising its ears before a fight. Crewmen glance at each other, not needing to ask what's happening. They already know. Something's coming. Up in the Combat Information Center, the screens tell the story. 3 radar contacts, closing fast from the southwest. Speed, increasing. Bearing, tightening. Formation, deliberate. Call signs blink on the tactical display. Sierra 1, Sierra 2, Sierra 3. Their transponders claim they're Venezuelan. The captain doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. Orders ripple down the decks like electricity. Magazine locks disengaged. Safeties cleared. Helmets on. The Arleigh Burke-class destroyer comes alive with quiet precision, its 300-person crew moving as one. Through the bridge windows, the horizon is still a faint blue haze. No ships in sight. Just the faint shimmer of dawn light over the Caribbean. But everyone knows they're out there. Small, fast, and closing. Contacts now at 12 nautical miles, reports the operations officer. Recommend we mark them as hostile intent, pending identification. Copy that, the captain says calmly. Maintain course. Weapons. Stand ready, but hold fire. Down on the deck, sailors secure hatches, man-gun stations, and double-check ammunition feeds. The CIWS, the close-in weapon system, starts its diagnostic hum. Its 6-barreled Gatling gun spins freely, the distinctive metallic whine filling the air. Every sailor knows that sound means one thing: readiness. But this isn't just another drill. For weeks, U.S. Navy destroyers have been patrolling the southern Caribbean under Operation Sentinel South, a mission meant to curb weapons and narcotics trafficking. Only days earlier, an American Seahawk helicopter intercepted 2 fast boats running contraband near Curaçao. When one refused to stop, it was sunk. Caracas called it aggression. The Pentagon called it law enforcement. Now, Venezuela is answering in kind, with its navy. On radar, the 3 Venezuelan patrol craft are closing at 28 knots, their formation tightening. They're likely Guaycamacudo-class patrol boats, small, fast, and light. Perfect for harassment, not combat. Their goal isn't to win. Their goal is to provoke. The Gravely's SPY-1D radar paints them in cold precision. The Aegis combat system fuses sonar, radar, and electronic signals into a single glowing picture, a digital map of potential war. But the captain's command is clear: restraint. The bridge intercom crackles. Engineering, maintain full turbine power. We may need to maneuver. Copy that, bridge. For the crew, the moment stretches. Time slows. The destroyer cuts through the sea just 14 miles off the Venezuelan coast. International waters, yes, but dangerously close to a country on edge. Every mile matters. Every gesture can be seen as a message. In the combat center, the watch officer speaks again. Contacts closing. Speed 29 knots. CPA 4.6 miles. The captain nods. Set visible posture. All topside systems in sight line. No radar locks. On deck, the Phalanx CIWS turret turns slightly, catching the faint sunlight on its white armor. The 5-inch gun points low toward the horizon. Every motion is deliberate, a message of capability, not aggression. Then comes the call. Bridge to Venezuelan naval vessels. This is United States warship, operating in international waters. You are closing distance at high speed. Alter course immediately. The message goes out in English, then Spanish. Silence. Then finally, a reply, thick with tension. This is Venezuelan Navy Patrol. You are operating close to our territorial waters. Identify your mission. the captain's voice remains steady. "Venezuelan naval vessels, this is USS Gravely. We are conducting lawful operations in international waters. Maintain safe separation." No more words, just the low hiss of static. The radar tracks steady. The boats hold at 3.6 nautical miles, now shadowing Gravely's starboard beam. They've made their point, and that's when the captain says softly, almost to himself, "It's easier to start a war than to explain one." This is how modern conflicts begin, not with missiles, but with proximity. With ships circling in the gray space between caution and confrontation. Every move is political theater. Every second is a calculation. By 0534, the Venezuelan boats finally peel away, heading east without another word. No shots fired, no headlines, just a log entry in a Navy report, and a deep breath from a crew who knows how close they came to history. But make no mistake, this was no accident. This was a message, and everyone in the Caribbean heard it loud and clear. To understand what happened that gray Caribbean morning, you have to rewind the clock, back several weeks, to a mission known only by its code name, Operation Sentinel South. Officially, it was a maritime security initiative. Unofficially, it was Washington's way of reminding everyone that the United States still ruled the sea lanes of the Western Hemisphere. The Southern Caribbean, stretching from Curaçao to Trinidad, had become a superhighway for narcotics, weapons, and black market fuel. The U.S. Coast Guard and Navy had tracked dozens of go-fast boats darting through Venezuelan waters, escorted, sometimes quietly, by elements of the Venezuelan Navy. Each interception was a spark waiting for fuel. And on paper, Sentinel South was about stopping smuggling. In reality, it was a slow-motion collision of sovereignty, pride, and politics. The mission's shadow. Since 2024, the U.S. Southern Command had been watching a new pattern emerge, smugglers operating under the cover of Venezuela's Bolivarian Security Zone, a maritime buffer claimed far beyond internationally recognized limits. Caracas said it was protecting its coast from foreign interference. Washington called it a gray zone expansion, an excuse to push back against U.S. presence. By early 2025, intelligence reports described entire logistics chains tied to military officers inside Venezuela. Cartel routes now blended with state protection. So Sentinel South became the counterstroke. Multi-service patrols, destroyers paired with Coast Guard cutters, surveillance drones, and long-range P-8 Poseidon aircraft, crisscrossing the Caribbean like silent hawks. When USS Gravely deployed to the region, it wasn't for combat. It was to watch, to record, and when necessary, to deter. 4 days before. At 03:10 hours, a U.S. Navy Seahawk helicopter intercepted 2 unmarked speedboats 60 miles north of the Venezuelan coast. Infrared footage later showed crates stacked along the decks, suspected rifles and ammunition. When ordered to stop, one boat fled toward Venezuelan waters. After multiple warnings, the Seahawk's crew fired disabling shots. The vessel caught fire and sank within minutes. No casualties were confirmed. The Pentagon filed it as law enforcement at sea. Caracas called it an act of war. Within hours, Venezuela's defense minister condemned the imperialist aggression. State television showed footage of sailors raising the national flag over patrol craft. Hashtags calling for "Defend Our Waters" flooded social media. For the first time in years, the Venezuelan Navy was on high alert. And so, when the Gravely appeared off their coast that week, it wasn't a coincidence. It was a statement. The chessboard of the Caribbean. The Southern Caribbean has always been a chessboard of politics and geography. To the north lie the Dutch islands, Curaçao, Aruba, Bonaire, hosting U.S. listening posts and refueling bases. To the south, Venezuela's coastline curves like a blade, studded with aging naval bases and missile batteries left over from another era. Between them, just a handful of nautical miles of international water. Each patrol, each radar ping, is a move in an invisible game. The U.S. wants to demonstrate presence, freedom of navigation, transparency, deterrence. Venezuela wants to assert control, show its people it's not intimidated. Neither side wants war. Both sides need to appear strong. That's why the Gravely's orders were specific. Maintain position, collect signatures, engage only if threatened, show presence, don't provoke. A simple line on a classified operations plan, but one that placed 300 sailors in the most volatile patch of ocean in the hemisphere, inside the fleet. To most sailors aboard the Gravely, the patrol was routine, until it wasn't. The destroyer had sailed from Mayport, Florida, weeks earlier, conducting anti-smuggling drills with the Coast Guard. On board were young crewmen fresh from Norfolk and veterans who'd served in the Persian Gulf. They knew what show presence really meant. You don't point your weapons, but you let them see you're ready. Below deck, the Aegis combat system quietly scanned the skies. In the Combat Information Center, radar technicians tracked cargo ships, fishing vessels, and the occasional aircraft flying from the Venezuelan coast. Every electronic signal was recorded: frequency, pulse width, modulation. Intelligence gold. Above deck, the MH-60R Seahawk crews drilled flight operations daily. The ship's engines hummed at low power, conserving fuel while staying alert for the next intercept. And then came the warning from Southern Command. Venezuelan patrol craft conducting aggressive maneuvers. Maintain defensive posture. Expect contact. Why now? Behind the naval tension was a broader political storm. Venezuela's government, under international sanctions, had turned toward Iran and Russia for support, buying radar systems and anti-ship missiles. In response, the United States intensified maritime surveillance to ensure those systems weren't being tested or shipped illegally. The Gravely's presence wasn't random, it was strategic timing. Every few years, Washington chooses one area to quietly remind the world of its reach. This time, that message sailed in gray steel along Venezuela's coast. Media coverage inside the U.S. barely mentioned it, just another counter-narcotics patrol, but regional observers knew better. To them, Sentinel South was the quiet equivalent of moving a knight across a chessboard into contested territory. Controlled friction. Inside military theory, the term controlled friction describes encounters that are deliberately tense but carefully managed. It's not combat, it's deterrence by proximity. You let the opponent feel your capability, the rumble of turbines, the slow rotation of gun barrels, the hum of radar, but you stop short of crossing the legal threshold of aggression. That's exactly what both sides were doing. Venezuelan commanders wanted to shadow the Gravely, maybe force a radio exchange they could broadcast on television. Look, the Americans backed away. U.S. officers wanted radar footage of Venezuelan signatures, engine patterns, electronic emissions, anything that could feed into threat databases. Each side used the other as a sensor test. But these games are played on a knife's edge. One wrong calculation, one sailor mistaking a radar lock for a threat, and the Caribbean could ignite faster than anyone could control. The stage is set. By the first week of October 2025, the stage was ready. Caracas was furious, its navy restless. Washington was resolute, its ships stationed within visual range of Venezuelan radar. Between them lay 14 nautical miles of open sea, the thinnest possible line separating diplomacy from disaster. When 3 patrol boats left their base at Puerto Cabello and sped north that morning, everyone involved knew what they were doing. It wasn't an accident, it was a test. The Gravely's crew didn't know if it would stay symbolic or spiral into crisis, but they understood one thing perfectly. The Caribbean might look calm, but it was a battlefield of intent. And in a few hours, that intent would come roaring toward them on radar screens labeled Sierra 1, 2, and 3. At first glance, the Caribbean standoff looked like a simple naval encounter: ships, patrols, warnings. But beneath the surface, it was a war of technology and perception, fought in frequencies, data streams, and camera lenses. The USS Gravely was not just a destroyer. It was a floating intelligence fortress. Its Aegis combat system could track hundreds of aerial and maritime contacts at once, identifying threats before they became visible to the naked eye. Its radars mapped the curvature of the sea itself, while onboard algorithms distinguished seagulls from surface drones with chilling precision. Every radio signal, every ping of sonar from the Venezuelan boats was captured, cataloged, and sent in encrypted bursts back to U.S. Southern Command. But this wasn't about missiles or torpedoes. It was about control of information. who saw what first, and who reacted second. In modern warfare, victory belongs not to the one who fires, but to the one who decides when not to. The gray zone. This is what strategists call the gray zone, that shadowy space between peace and open war. Here, nations provoke without shooting, challenge without crossing the line. A close pass of a patrol boat becomes a message, a radar lock becomes a political signal. A radio silence becomes defiance. The Gravely's crew was trained to operate in this ambiguity. They knew that restraint could be more powerful than retaliation. Each sailor became a sensor, each action a potential spark. And yet, the tension was unbearable. Watching hostile blips approach your ship at full speed and doing nothing, that takes more discipline than firing a missile. For the Venezuelan side, this was about sovereignty. Their outdated corvettes carried little more than light weapons, but they had something else: the camera of propaganda. Every second was filmed, every maneuver broadcast to prove they had defended their waters. This was psychological warfare, less about firepower, more about narrative dominance. Invisible warfare. In the digital age, invisibility is the ultimate weapon. The Gravely's electronic warfare suite could blind enemy sensors or scramble communications, but its operators held back. Orders were clear: do not escalate electronically unless fired upon. So they watched, they recorded, and they waited. The Aegis display glowed with red and green blips, symbols of two nations staring each other down through the veil of technology. The ocean was calm, but the electromagnetic spectrum above it was a battlefield. The U.S. Navy calls this left-of-launch dominance, defeating threats before they're ever fired. And that dominance depends on one thing: knowledge. In those silent hours, the Gravely wasn't just defending itself, it was studying, measuring radar reflections, decoding Venezuelan comms chatter, and feeding it all into a vast intelligence web. This was warfare without explosions, a digital duel in the age of deterrence. The morning of October 6, 2025 began like any other watch rotation aboard the USS Gravely. The Caribbean was calm, too calm. The ship's radar operators had tracked the Venezuelan patrol crafts for hours, small green echoes that moved like sharks on a screen. But just before sunrise, those echoes accelerated. 3 contacts, bearing north, closing fast. Bridge, CIC, multiple fast movers inbound, 30 knots and climbing. The voice was calm, professional, but under the surface, every heartbeat quickened. On deck, sailors gathered along the rails, eyes straining toward the horizon. The first patrol craft appeared, a dark silhouette against the amber dawn, its wake glowing white under the rising sun. 2 more followed, forming a wedge pattern. They weren't there to observe. They were challenging. A deadly dance. "Maintain course and speed," came the captain's order. His voice was steady, but his eyes were locked on the Venezuelan vessels closing the gap. 8 nautical miles, then 6, then 4. Over the radio, a burst of static cracked, followed by a voice in accented English. "American warship, you are violating Venezuelan territorial waters. Alter course immediately, or we will take defensive measures." It was theater, but deadly theater. The Gravely's navigation officer replied, firm and rehearsed. "This is United States Navy warship operating in international waters under freedom of navigation. We intend no harm, but will defend ourselves if threatened." The Venezuelan ships responded by splitting formation. One veered starboard, another port, boxing the destroyer in. The distance shrank to less than 2 nautical miles, a heartbeat in naval time. Alarms flickered. The Gravely's weapon systems went to condition 1, fully ready. Deck gunners took positions, fingers near triggers, but not on them. And then came the most dangerous maneuver. The lead Venezuelan craft surged forward, cutting directly across Gravely's bow at less than 200 meters. A single misjudgment of speed or timing, and steel would meet steel at 25 knots. Instant disaster. Seconds from impact. "Helm, all stop!" The order echoed through the bridge. Turbines roared, then fell silent as the 9,000-ton destroyer shuddered against the slowing sea. The Venezuelan vessel scraped through the wake, close enough for sailors to see the faces of the crew. Young men, defiant, filming the encounter with cell phones. Cameras, not cannons, were their real weapons. For 30 frozen seconds, both ships sat still, engines humming, crews staring across the blue void. The Gravely's captain stepped closer to the glass, his voice low. "They want a reaction. Don't give it to them." And just like that, the moment passed. The Venezuelan boats pulled away, circling once before retreating toward their coast. But the damage was done, not to ships, but to trust. Every second had been recorded, broadcast, politicized. Both sides had stared into the abyss and stepped back. The Caribbean returned to silence, but every sailor aboard Gravely knew it. The ocean had come one mistake away from war. When the sun fully rose over the Caribbean, the USS Gravely had already resumed her steady patrol line, turbines humming, radar sweeping, crew silent. But hundreds of miles away, the battle had shifted from sea to screen. By midday, the incident was headline news. Satellite feeds from regional monitoring networks showed grainy footage of the Venezuelan patrol boats crossing the destroyer's bow. Within hours, Caracas released its own statement, accusing the United States Navy of provocative maneuvers within sovereign maritime territory. In Washington, the Pentagon wasted no time countering. A spokesperson at the Department of Defense briefed reporters, stating that the USS Gravely remained at all times within internationally recognized waters, under Operation Sentinel South, the anti-smuggling mission that had already been straining relations between both nations. The Caribbean had become more than a warm sea. It was now a geopolitical stage. A battle of narratives. Across newsrooms, analysts replayed the same 30 seconds of video. Some framed it as a Venezuelan provocation, others as a U.S. overstep in Latin America's backyard. Social media erupted. Hashtags like #Caribbean Standoff and #Freedom of Navigation trended within hours. Clips of sailors standing tense at their stations were dissected frame by frame. Every motion became a message, every silence a signal. Inside the Gravely's Combat Information Center, sailors were told to lock away their phones and maintain radio discipline. What they'd experienced wasn't just a near collision, it was now a case study for modern naval deterrence. Commanders from U.S. Southern Command gathered the data, radar tracks, communications, and optical logs, to reconstruct the timeline. Nothing would be left to interpretation. Meanwhile, in Caracas, the footage was broadcast with dramatic narration. American warship approaches Venezuelan coast, underscored with patriotic music. Crowds rallied in Bolivar Square. Venezuelan naval officials vowed measured vigilance, while quietly keeping their fast boats near the same waters. Washington responds. At the White House, advisors met behind closed doors. No one wanted escalation, but no one wanted to appear weak either. Military analysts described it as controlled friction, an encounter engineered to test nerve, timing, and restraint. For the men and women aboard the Gravely, though, there was no sense of victory, only exhaustion. Hours after the standoff, the captain walked the deck in silence. The sea was calm again, deceptively peaceful. He looked out across the horizon and said quietly, "We did our job. We didn't fire. That's what matters." And it did. Because at sea, not pulling the trigger can be the hardest order to follow. The Caribbean that morning was deceptively calm. Just wind, waves, and the hum of machinery. But for the crew of the USS Gravely, that sea would forever carry the echo of a moment when peace hung by a thread. No shots fired, no flags lowered. Just silence, the kind that defines the thin line between deterrence and disaster. It's easy to think of modern warfare as missiles, drones, and data. But the truth is, conflict today is often psychological, fought in the gray zone between aggression and restraint. Every decision, every order, every pause becomes a move in an invisible chess game, one played not with soldiers, but with signals, radar locks, and the weight of perception. When the Gravely's crew stood their ground without firing a single round, they didn't just avoid war, they won a different kind of victory, the kind that never makes headlines, but keeps the world intact. The human factor. Every sailor aboard that destroyer, from the radar techs deep in the CIC to the lookout gripping the rail on deck, became part of something larger, a test of discipline, courage, and control. Their job wasn't to defeat an enemy, but to stop fear from taking command. As the ship sailed north that afternoon, the captain wrote a single line in his logbook. Maintained presence, no escalation, mission success. 3 simple sentences that carried the weight of restraint, a reminder that real strength is not about the ability to destroy, but the will to hold back. The lesson beyond the sea. For nations, the encounter was a warning. The Caribbean chessboard is shifting. Every maneuver is now a message, every patrol a potential spark. For viewers, it's a glimpse into the reality behind military headlines, that peace isn't maintained by silence, but by people standing at the edge of chaos, making the right call when everything could go wrong. The next time you see a destroyer gliding across blue water, remember that it's not just a machine of war. It's a floating promise of balance, a signal that strength and restraint can coexist. Because sometimes, the most important battles are the ones that end before they begin. Engagement, call to action. So here's my question to you, the viewer. If you were the captain of the USS Gravely that morning, would you have held your fire or shown force? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if you want to support real military storytelling, stories that go beyond explosions and politics, then join our channel's fleet. You'll get exclusive briefings, behind-the-scenes analysis, and early access to upcoming episodes from the world's most tense maritime flashpoints. Until next time, sailors, fair winds, steady hands, and remember, sometimes peace survives because someone chose not to pull the trigger.